Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that an applicant for a Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B has a documented history of domestic disputes that resulted in restraining orders being issued, although the applicant claims these issues are now resolved. Considering the regulatory framework governing firearm licenses in Spain, which of the following risk assessment approaches is most appropriate? Option A. Grant the Licencia de Armas Tipo B upon the applicant's assurance that the domestic disputes are resolved and the restraining orders are no longer active, without further independent verification. Option B. Disregard the domestic disputes and restraining orders as irrelevant to the firearm license application, focusing solely on the absence of a criminal conviction. Option C. Postpone the decision on the Licencia de Armas Tipo B indefinitely until all past disputes are demonstrably and permanently resolved, without establishing a clear timeline or investigative process. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that meticulously reviews the applicant's history, including the circumstances and current status of the restraining orders, to determine if they pose a risk to public safety and are suitable for firearm possession under Spanish law. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that meticulously reviews the applicant's history, including the circumstances and current status of the restraining orders, to determine if they pose a risk to public safety and are suitable for firearm possession under Spanish law. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where an applicant for a Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B presents a history of domestic disputes, including restraining orders. This is professionally challenging because the Licencia de Armas Tipo B is for carrying firearms for personal defense, and the applicant's history raises significant concerns about their suitability and the potential risk to public safety. Careful judgment is required to balance the applicant's rights with the paramount need for public security, adhering strictly to Spanish firearms regulations. The best approach involves a thorough risk assessment that prioritizes public safety and compliance with Spanish law. This entails a comprehensive review of the applicant's entire history, specifically focusing on any documented instances of violence, aggression, or instability, including the domestic disputes and restraining orders. Spanish law, particularly the Reglamento de Armas, mandates that applicants must demonstrate good conduct and be free from circumstances that could lead to the misuse of firearms. The presence of restraining orders is a direct indicator of potential risk and would necessitate a detailed inquiry into the circumstances surrounding them and their current status. A refusal based on this evidence, pending further investigation and confirmation of no ongoing threat, aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on responsible firearm ownership and public safety. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic disputes and restraining orders as irrelevant to the firearm license application, focusing solely on the absence of a criminal conviction. This fails to acknowledge that Spanish firearms legislation considers broader indicators of suitability beyond formal criminal convictions. The Reglamento de Armas allows for refusal based on evidence of behavior that suggests a risk, even without a criminal record. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license automatically upon the applicant's assertion that the disputes are resolved and the restraining orders are no longer active, without independent verification or a detailed risk assessment. This bypasses the due diligence required by the regulations, which necessitates an active assessment of the applicant's current suitability and potential risk factors. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay the decision indefinitely without a clear process for gathering further information or making a determination. This is professionally unacceptable as it fails to provide a timely resolution for the applicant and leaves a potential public safety risk unaddressed. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant Spanish firearms legislation. This involves identifying all statutory requirements and discretionary factors for license issuance. The next step is to meticulously gather all available information pertaining to the applicant, including any documented history of disputes, restraining orders, or behavioral issues. This information must then be critically assessed against the legal criteria for suitability, with a strong emphasis on public safety. If significant risk factors are identified, further investigation or a formal refusal, supported by clear regulatory justification, is the appropriate course of action. Question 2. Analysis of a situation where an applicant for a Type B weapons license in Spain claims to have received credible threats What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach for the Guardia Civil to adopt? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive investigation into the nature and credibility of the threats. Assess the applicant's overall suitability, mental and physical fitness, and understanding of safe firearm handling and storage, in accordance with the Reglamento de Armas. Option B. Deny the Type B weapons license solely based on the applicant's expressed fear of threats, without exploring the legitimacy of the threats or the applicant's capacity for responsible firearm ownership. Option C. Immediately grant the Type B weapons license upon confirmation of the applicant's stated fear of threats, without further investigation into the specifics of the threats or the applicant's overall suitability. Option D. Issue a provisional Type B weapons license pending a full background check, allowing the applicant immediate possession of a firearm for self-defense. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive investigation into the nature and credibility of the threats, assess the applicant's overall suitability, mental and physical fitness, and understanding of safe firearm handling and storage, in accordance with the Reglamento de Armas. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent for firearm ownership with the inherent risks associated with Type B weapons, which are intended for personal defense. The core challenge lies in conducting a thorough risk assessment that is both objective and compliant with Spanish regulations, ensuring public safety without unfairly penalizing a law-abiding citizen. The Guardia Civil's responsibility is to meticulously evaluate the applicant's suitability, considering potential threats and the applicant's capacity to manage a firearm responsibly, all within the strict legal framework governing Type B licenses in Spain. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that meticulously examines the applicant's personal circumstances, mental and physical fitness, and any history that might indicate a propensity for misuse or an increased risk of becoming a victim of crime. This includes verifying the applicant's stated need for a Type B weapon, assessing their understanding of safe storage and handling, and thoroughly investigating any reported threats or vulnerabilities. Spanish regulations, particularly those derived from the Reglamento de Armas, mandate a rigorous evaluation of an applicant's suitability, emphasizing the prevention of firearm misuse, and ensuring that licenses are granted only to individuals who demonstrate a clear and legitimate need and the capacity for responsible ownership. This approach directly addresses the regulatory requirement to assess the applicant's idoneidad, suitability, and necessidad, need, for a Type B license, ensuring that the decision is grounded in objective evidence and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the license based solely on the applicant's assertion of being threatened, without conducting an independent verification of the threat's credibility or assessing the applicant's overall risk profile. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation to conduct a thorough risk assessment and could lead to the issuance of a license to someone who may not be genuinely suitable or whose situation might escalate due to firearm possession. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license solely because the applicant expresses fear, without exploring the specific nature of the threat, the applicant's proposed security measures, or their capacity to handle the responsibility. This approach is overly restrictive and does not align with the principle of assessing individual suitability and legitimate need as required by Spanish law. Finally, approving the license without any investigation into the applicant's background, mental state, or understanding of firearm safety would be a gross dereliction of duty, directly contravening the core principles of responsible firearm licensing and public safety mandated by the Reglamento de Armas. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the specific legal requirements for Type B licenses in Spain, including the criteria for suitability and need. The process should involve gathering all relevant documentation, conducting interviews, performing background checks, and, where necessary, consulting with other authorities. Each piece of information must be critically evaluated to build a comprehensive risk profile. The decision should be based on a balanced assessment of the applicant's legitimate need against any identified risks, always prioritizing public safety and adherence to the Reglamento de Armas. If there are doubts or ambiguities, further investigation or a request for additional information from the applicant is warranted before making a final determination. Question 3. Consider a scenario where an applicant for a Type B weapons license in Spain provides a detailed personal statement outlining their responsible intentions for firearm ownership, but a background check reveals a past incident of public intoxication and a minor altercation, for which no formal charges were filed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Guardia Civil in assessing the applicant's suitability? Option A. Grant the license based on the applicant's detailed personal statement and the absence of formal charges, assuming the past incident was isolated and does not reflect current character or risk. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes an in-depth review of the incident, seeking further information from relevant authorities if necessary, and evaluating the applicant's overall history and current circumstances to determine if the past incident indicates a present risk to public safety or suitability for firearm ownership. Option C. Request a psychological evaluation solely based on the public intoxication incident, without considering other aspects of the applicant's history or the nature of the altercation. Option D. Immediately deny the license application based on the past incident, as any history of altercations, regardless of formal charges, disqualifies an applicant from obtaining a Type B weapons license. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes an in-depth review of the incident, seeking further information from relevant authorities if necessary, and evaluating the applicant's overall history and current circumstances to determine if the past incident indicates a present risk to public safety or suitability for firearm ownership. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing an individual's stated intent with the objective assessment of potential risks, as mandated by Spanish firearms legislation concerning the Type B weapons license. The Guardia Civil, responsible for evaluating these applications, must exercise careful judgment to ensure public safety without unduly infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting suitability and risk assessment in a manner that is both legally sound and practically effective. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive and objective risk assessment that meticulously evaluates all available information regarding the applicant's suitability. This includes a thorough review of their personal history, mental and physical health, and any relevant reports or documentation that might indicate a propensity for misuse or danger. Spanish law, particularly the Reglamento de Armas, emphasizes the need for applicants to demonstrate they are not a danger to themselves or others. This approach aligns with the regulatory framework by prioritizing a systematic, evidence-based evaluation of risk, ensuring that the decision to grant or deny the license is grounded in objective criteria and legal requirements for suitability. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's self-declaration of intent without independent verification or further investigation. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation to proactively assess risk and could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who, despite their assurances, poses a potential threat. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license based on unsubstantiated rumors or personal biases, as this lacks the objective evidence required by law and constitutes an arbitrary decision. Furthermore, focusing exclusively on minor administrative oversights in the application, while important, without addressing potential substantive risks to public safety, represents a failure to conduct a holistic risk assessment as required. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements for the Type B weapons license in Spain. This involves identifying all relevant articles within the Reglamento de Armas pertaining to applicant suitability and risk assessment. The process should then involve gathering all pertinent information, objectively analyzing it against these legal standards, and documenting the rationale for the decision. If any doubts or red flags arise, further investigation or consultation with relevant experts should be undertaken before a final determination is made. This structured, evidence-based approach ensures compliance with the law and upholds the principle of public safety. Question 4. During the evaluation of a Type B weapons license application in Spain, a firearms officer reviews an applicant's record, which includes 2 minor public order offenses from 5 years ago. What is the most prudent course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the nature, recency, and severity of the public order offenses, considering any evidence of rehabilitation, to assess the applicant's current suitability for a Type B weapons license. Option B. Immediately reject the application based on the presence of any public order offenses, irrespective of their nature or age. Option C. Focus solely on the most recent public order offense and make a decision based only on that incident. Option D. Approve the application without further investigation, assuming minor offenses do not disqualify an applicant. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the nature, recency, and severity of the public order offenses, considering any evidence of rehabilitation, to assess the applicant's current suitability for a Type B weapons license. Explanation. During the evaluation of a Type B weapons license application in Spain, a firearms officer faces a scenario where the applicant has a history of minor public order offenses. The challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply for a license with the public safety mandate inherent in firearms regulation. A thorough risk assessment is crucial, requiring more than a superficial review of the applicant's background. The most appropriate approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's entire history, including the nature, recency, and severity of the public order offenses, and assessing their relevance to the safe possession of a firearm. This includes considering any evidence of rehabilitation or mitigating circumstances. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible firearms licensing, which prioritize public safety while adhering to due process. The Spanish Guardia Civil, responsible for overseeing these licenses, is mandated to conduct such detailed assessments to determine if an applicant poses a risk. This thoroughness ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of the law, which requires applicants to demonstrate they are not a danger to themselves or others. An approach that dismisses the application solely based on the existence of any public order offense, regardless of its nature or age, is overly simplistic and potentially discriminatory. It fails to acknowledge that not all offenses carry the same weight in the context of firearms licensing and may not indicate a present risk. This overlooks the requirement for a nuanced, case-by-case evaluation. Another inappropriate approach would be to grant the license without any further investigation, assuming that minor offenses do not preclude an applicant. This neglects the fundamental duty of the licensing authority to conduct a diligent risk assessment and ensure public safety. It bypasses the regulatory requirement for a thorough background check and could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who may pose a risk. Finally, an approach that focuses only on the most recent offense without considering the broader context or the applicant's overall history is incomplete. Comprehensive risk assessment requires understanding the pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. This selective focus can lead to an inaccurate assessment of the applicant's suitability. Professionals in this field should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific legal requirements for Type B licenses in Spain. This involves identifying all relevant criteria, such as the applicant's criminal record, mental health, and any history of violence or substance abuse. The next step is to gather all necessary documentation and conduct thorough background checks. Following this, a detailed risk assessment should be performed, weighing any negative factors against evidence of rehabilitation or mitigating circumstances. The final decision must be clearly documented, with a rationale that demonstrates adherence to legal standards and prioritizes public safety. Question 5. Research into an applicant's request for a Type B weapons license, Licencia de Armas Tipo B, in Spain reveals that the individual cites general concerns about potential threats from business rivals and economic instability as the primary reasons for seeking personal defense. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with Spanish regulations? Option A. Accept the applicant's subjective assessment of risk and proceed with the licensing process, prioritizing the applicant's perceived need for protection over the requirement for objective evidence. Option B. Advise the applicant to explore alternative security measures and defer the decision on the firearm license until more concrete and immediate threats can be demonstrably proven. Option C. Request and meticulously review specific, verifiable evidence of direct threats or imminent danger to the applicant's safety, such as official police reports or documented instances of harassment, to objectively assess the genuine need for personal defense as stipulated by the Reglamento de Armas. Option D. Issue the Type B weapons license based on the applicant's assertion of potential risks associated with their business activities, assuming that their economic standing implies a heightened vulnerability. The correct answer is C. Request and meticulously review specific, verifiable evidence of direct threats or imminent danger to the applicant's safety, such as official police reports or documented instances of harassment, to objectively assess the genuine need for personal defense as stipulated by the Reglamento de Armas. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the applicant's stated purpose for seeking a Type B firearm license in Spain, which is for personal defense against potential threats related to their business activities, requires a rigorous and objective assessment of genuine and immediate danger. The Spanish Directorate General of the Guardia Civil, Dirección General de la Guardia Civil, mandates that the justification for a Type B license must demonstrate a concrete and demonstrable need for personal protection, not merely a generalized fear or speculative risk. The applicant's reliance on vague concerns about business rivals and potential economic repercussions, without providing specific evidence of threats, makes their request difficult to validate under the strict requirements of the Reglamento de Armas, arms regulations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a legitimate need for self-defense and an attempt to acquire a firearm based on unsubstantiated anxieties. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented risk assessment that directly addresses the specific requirements of the Spanish arms regulations for a Type B license. This entails requesting and meticulously reviewing concrete evidence of threats, such as official police reports of intimidation, documented instances of violence or harassment directly linked to their business, or credible intelligence indicating an imminent and specific danger. The assessment must focus on whether the applicant's situation presents a demonstrable and immediate risk that cannot be adequately mitigated by other means, aligning with the principle that firearm possession for personal defense is an exceptional measure. This approach ensures compliance with Article 146 of the Reglamento de Armas, which outlines the conditions for obtaining a Type B license, emphasizing the necessity of proving a genuine and pressing need for self-protection. An incorrect approach would be to accept the applicant's subjective fears and generalized concerns about business rivals at face value without demanding specific, verifiable evidence of threats. This fails to meet the regulatory burden of proof required by Spanish law, which necessitates objective justification for the issuance of a firearm license for personal defense. Another incorrect approach would be to base the decision solely on the applicant's perceived social or economic standing, assuming that their business activities inherently expose them to a level of danger warranting a firearm. This is ethically unsound and legally indefensible, as it deviates from the principle of assessing individual risk based on demonstrable facts rather than assumptions. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes expediting the licensing process over due diligence by overlooking the lack of concrete evidence would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an individual who does not meet the stringent criteria. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the specific legal and regulatory requirements for the license in question. This involves identifying the objective criteria established by the relevant authorities, in this case, the Guardia Civil and the Reglamento de Armas. The next step is to gather all available information and evidence, critically evaluating its credibility and relevance to the established criteria. This includes actively seeking corroborating documentation and, where appropriate, consulting with law enforcement or other relevant agencies. The assessment should then objectively weigh the evidence against the legal requirements, making a determination based on facts rather than speculation or personal bias. Finally, the decision and the rationale behind it must be thoroughly documented to ensure transparency and accountability, and to provide a clear record for any future review. Question 6. Compliance review shows an applicant for a Spain Type B weapons license, Licencia de Armas Tipo B, has submitted documentation stating a need for self-defense due to perceived threats. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to ensure compliance with Spanish regulations? Option A. Accept the applicant's self-declaration of perceived threats as sufficient justification for self-defense and proceed with the license application without further investigation. Option B. Conduct a thorough verification of the applicant's stated need for self-defense by corroborating their claims with objective evidence, such as police reports of threats, security assessments of their property, and a review of their personal history for any indicators of risk, while also assessing their psychological suitability. Option C. Expedite the review process by overlooking any minor inconsistencies in the applicant's submitted documentation, focusing primarily on the completeness of the application form itself. Option D. Grant the license based on the applicant's reputation within their community and their assertion that they are a responsible citizen, assuming this negates any potential risks. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough verification of the applicant's stated need for self-defense by corroborating their claims with objective evidence, such as police reports of threats, security assessments of their property, and a review of their personal history for any indicators of risk, while also assessing their psychological suitability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the inherent risks associated with firearm ownership, specifically within the context of the Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations. The core challenge lies in discerning genuine need from potential misuse, necessitating a thorough and objective risk assessment that goes beyond superficial declaration. A failure to adequately assess risk can have severe consequences, including public safety threats and regulatory noncompliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that meticulously verifies the applicant's stated purpose for requiring a Type B license. This includes corroborating their declared need for self-defense or professional security duties through objective evidence, such as documented threats, employment verification in security roles, or specific security plans. The assessment must also consider the applicant's psychological profile, history of violence, and any relevant criminal records, as mandated by Spanish law governing firearm permits. This approach ensures that the license is granted only to individuals who meet the stringent criteria and pose minimal risk, aligning with the protective intent of the regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration of needing the weapon for self-defense without any independent verification. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a thorough assessment of the applicant's suitability and the genuine necessity of firearm possession, potentially overlooking critical risk factors. Another incorrect approach is to grant the license based on the applicant's perceived social standing or influence, assuming that such factors inherently indicate trustworthiness. This is a subjective and discriminatory practice that disregards the objective criteria established by Spanish law for firearm licensing and introduces an unacceptable level of bias into the decision-making process. A further incorrect approach is to expedite the process by overlooking minor discrepancies in the submitted documentation, such as incomplete background checks or unverified references. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the regulatory framework designed to ensure public safety, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an unsuitable individual. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with evaluating Type B license applications in Spain must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves establishing clear protocols for verifying applicant information, conducting thorough background checks, and assessing psychological suitability. When faced with ambiguous information or potential red flags, professionals should err on the side of caution, seeking further clarification and documentation before making a decision. Ethical considerations demand prioritizing public safety above all else, ensuring that firearm licenses are issued responsibly and in strict accordance with the law. Question 7. Compliance review shows that an applicant for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B in Spain has submitted an application stating a general interest in sport shooting as the sole purpose for firearm ownership, but has provided no specific details regarding club membership, competition history, or training certifications. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to take? Option A. Deny the license application due to insufficient detail and lack of demonstrable commitment to sport shooting. Option B. Issue a provisional license while awaiting further information, allowing the applicant to acquire a firearm in the interim. Option C. Request further documentation and evidence to substantiate the stated purpose and conduct a thorough background check, including an assessment of the applicant's suitability and stability before making a decision. Option D. Grant the license immediately, as the applicant has stated a legitimate purpose, and further scrutiny would be overly burdensome. Correct answer is C. Request further documentation and evidence to substantiate the stated purpose, and conduct a thorough background check, including an assessment of the applicant's suitability and stability, before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the inherent risks associated with firearm ownership, particularly when the stated intent is vague and potentially indicative of underlying issues. The licensing authority must exercise due diligence to ensure public safety without unfairly prejudicing an applicant who may otherwise be suitable. The Licencia de Armas Tipo B in Spain is granted for specific purposes, and a thorough risk assessment is paramount to uphold the law's intent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that goes beyond the applicant's self-declaration. This includes verifying the stated purpose for firearm ownership through objective evidence, such as documentation from relevant sporting clubs, professional bodies, or proof of participation in regulated shooting activities. It also necessitates a thorough background check, including any relevant mental health assessments or reports, and an evaluation of the applicant's overall suitability and stability. This approach aligns with the Spanish regulatory framework for firearm licensing, which emphasizes public safety and responsible ownership by requiring a demonstration of legitimate need and the absence of disqualifying factors. The Guardia Civil, responsible for overseeing firearm permits, is mandated to assess these factors rigorously. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the license based solely on the applicant's assertion of a legitimate purpose, without seeking independent verification or conducting further inquiries. This fails to meet the due diligence requirements of the Spanish regulations, which place the onus on the applicant to prove their suitability and legitimate need, and on the licensing authority to verify this. Such an approach risks overlooking potential risks to public safety. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license outright based on a perceived lack of detail in the initial application, without providing the applicant an opportunity to clarify or supplement their submission. While caution is necessary, an outright denial without further investigation or communication can be seen as arbitrary and may not adhere to principles of fairness and due process within the Spanish administrative system. A third incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the applicant's stated recreational interest without adequately assessing their psychological stability or past behavior. The Licencia de Armas Tipo B is not merely for casual sport. It implies a level of responsibility and mental fortitude that must be demonstrably present. Ignoring potential psychological red flags, even if not explicitly stated as a concern by the applicant, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of the Spanish firearm licensing regime, particularly the criteria for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The process should be structured to gather objective information, assess potential risks, and ensure that decisions are justifiable and defensible. When faced with ambiguity, the professional's duty is to seek clarification and further evidence, rather than making assumptions or proceeding with insufficient information. Ethical considerations of public safety must always be paramount, balanced with the applicant's right to a fair assessment. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that when evaluating an applicant for a Type B weapon license in Spain, what is the most prudent and legally compliant approach to risk assessment? Option A. Base the decision primarily on the applicant's reputation and social standing within their local community, as this is a strong indicator of responsible behavior. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment encompassing the applicant's mental and physical fitness, declared purpose for the license, and a thorough review of any relevant history, potentially requiring additional verification. Option C. Grant the license if the applicant provides a written statement of responsible intent and has no immediate criminal convictions, assuming their word is sufficient. Option D. Deny the license if any unverified rumor or a past minor infraction, unrelated to firearm safety, is brought to the attention of the licensing authority. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment encompassing the applicant's mental and physical fitness, declared purpose for the license, and a thorough review of any relevant history, potentially requiring additional verification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent for a Type B weapon license in Spain with the inherent risks associated with firearm ownership. The licensing authority must conduct a thorough risk assessment, considering not only the applicant's background, but also the potential for misuse or accidental harm. The challenge lies in making an objective determination based on available information, adhering strictly to Spanish regulations, without succumbing to personal bias or overlooking critical risk factors. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that meticulously examines all aspects of the applicant's profile and stated purpose for the Type B license in Spain. This approach prioritizes a thorough review of the applicant's mental and physical fitness, their declared reasons for seeking the license, e.g., sport shooting, collection, and any relevant criminal or psychological history. It involves consulting official databases and potentially requiring further documentation or interviews to verify information and assess potential risks. This aligns with the principles of responsible firearm regulation in Spain, which mandate a rigorous evaluation to ensure public safety and prevent the diversion of firearms for illicit purposes. The focus is on proactive identification and mitigation of risks before a license is granted. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the license based solely on the applicant's assurance of responsible ownership and a clean criminal record, without a deeper investigation into their psychological stability or the specific context of their intended use. This fails to meet the due diligence requirements of Spanish firearm licensing, which necessitates a proactive assessment of potential risks beyond a superficial check. It overlooks the possibility of latent issues that could manifest after the license is issued. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license based on a single, unsubstantiated rumor or a minor, unrelated past infraction that has no bearing on the applicant's current suitability or the specific requirements for a Type B license in Spain. This demonstrates a lack of objective assessment and could lead to an unfair denial, failing to uphold the principle of granting licenses to eligible individuals while maintaining public safety. It also risks legal challenges based on arbitrary decision-making. A further incorrect approach is to rely heavily on the applicant's social standing or perceived respectability within their community as a primary determinant of suitability, without a systematic evaluation of the legally mandated criteria. While community standing can be a positive indicator, it is not a substitute for the thorough, objective risk assessment required by Spanish law. This approach introduces subjective bias and neglects the specific regulatory framework governing firearm licenses. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the specific legal and regulatory requirements for the Type B weapon license in Spain. This involves systematically gathering all necessary documentation, conducting thorough background checks, and evaluating the applicant's fitness against established criteria. Any doubts or ambiguities should trigger further investigation rather than immediate approval or denial. The process should be transparent, objective, and consistently applied to all applicants, ensuring that decisions are defensible and aligned with the overarching goal of public safety. Question 9. Compliance review shows that an applicant for a Type B weapons license, Licencia de Armas Tipo B, in Spain has stated their reason for seeking the license as personal defense, without providing further specific details or context. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that includes seeking further clarification from the applicant, reviewing their background for any indicators of instability or propensity for misuse, and evaluating the credibility of their stated need for personal defense in the context of their overall profile. Option B. Deny the Type B weapons license application outright due to the vagueness of the stated reason, assuming it indicates a lack of genuine need or potential for misuse. Option C. Issue the Type B weapons license immediately, as the stated reason of personal defense is a legitimate and sufficient justification under Spanish law. Option D. Grant the Type B weapons license, but only after confirming the applicant has no prior criminal convictions, as this is the sole criterion for suitability for personal defense firearm ownership. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that includes seeking further clarification from the applicant, reviewing their background for any indicators of instability or propensity for misuse, and evaluating the credibility of their stated need for personal defense in the context of their overall profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the inherent risks associated with firearm ownership, particularly when the stated intent is vague and potentially indicative of underlying issues. The licensing authority must exercise due diligence to ensure public safety without unfairly penalizing responsible citizens. The Type B license in Spain is for personal defense, which carries a heightened responsibility for the licensee. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, individualized risk assessment that goes beyond the applicant's self-declaration. This approach requires the licensing authority to actively seek corroborating evidence of the applicant's suitability, including their mental state, stability, and any history that might suggest a propensity for misuse. This aligns with the spirit of the Spanish firearms regulations, Reglamento de Armas, which mandates that licenses are only granted to individuals who demonstrate the necessary aptitude and reliability, and do not pose a risk to themselves or others. The authority must consider the applicant's stated reasons for wanting a Type B license in the context of their overall profile and any available information. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the license solely based on the applicant's stated intention of personal defense, without further investigation. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement of assessing the applicant's suitability and reliability. The vagueness of the stated reason could mask underlying issues that would disqualify the applicant under the Reglamento de Armas, which emphasizes the need for a demonstrable and legitimate need for a firearm for personal defense, coupled with proven stability. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license outright based on the perceived vagueness of the stated intention, without exploring the applicant's background or offering them an opportunity to provide further clarification or evidence. This could be seen as an arbitrary decision and may not adhere to the principles of fairness and due process. The Reglamento de Armas requires a reasoned decision based on a comprehensive assessment, not a preemptive rejection. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the applicant's past legal record, assuming that a clean record automatically equates to suitability for a Type B license. While a clean record is a prerequisite, it is not sufficient on its own. The assessment must also consider the applicant's current mental and emotional state, their stated motivations, and any other factors that might indicate a risk, as mandated by the comprehensive nature of the suitability assessment under Spanish law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and investigative stance. When faced with an application where the stated intent is broad or potentially concerning, the decision-making process should involve 1. A detailed review of the application and stated reasons. 2. Identification of any ambiguities or potential red flags. 3. A structured risk assessment framework that considers all relevant factors beyond the immediate statement, including psychological evaluations if deemed necessary and permitted by law. 4. Seeking corroborating evidence or further information from the applicant or other authorized sources. 5. Making a decision based on a holistic evaluation of the applicant's suitability and the potential risk to public safety, in strict adherence to the Reglamento de Armas. Question 10. Which approach would be most appropriate for a licensed professional in Spain advising a client who needs to accurately declare the value of their firearm collection for a Type B weapons license application, when the client believes their collection is worth significantly more than recent market sales suggest? Option A. Accept the client's subjective estimation of the collection's value, as the client is the owner and presumably has the best understanding of their assets. Option B. Suggest delaying the formal valuation until the market for collectible firearms improves, while advising the client to proceed with the application using a placeholder value. Option C. Obtain independent, certified appraisals for each firearm based on current market conditions and the specific condition and provenance of each weapon, ensuring these valuations are documented and submitted as per the requirements of the Spanish Directorate General of the Guardia Civil. Option D. Advise the client to inflate the appraised value slightly to ensure the collection is perceived as a substantial asset, thereby potentially expediting the licensing process. The correct answer is C. Obtain independent, certified appraisals for each firearm based on current market conditions and the specific condition and provenance of each weapon, ensuring these valuations are documented and submitted as per the requirements of the Spanish Directorate General of the Guardia Civil. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial needs and the long-term implications of their financial decisions, particularly when those decisions involve regulated assets like firearms. The professional must navigate ethical obligations to the client, including providing accurate advice, while also adhering to the strict regulations governing the Type B weapons license in Spain. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the client's desire for liquidity with the legal requirements and potential consequences of misrepresenting asset value. The best approach involves a meticulous and transparent valuation process that strictly adheres to the guidelines for determining the market value of firearms for licensing purposes in Spain. This includes obtaining independent, professional appraisals from certified valuers who specialize in firearms, and ensuring these appraisals are based on current market conditions and the specific condition and provenance of each weapon. This approach is correct because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical integrity. By obtaining objective valuations, the professional ensures that the declared value accurately reflects the asset's worth, thereby meeting the requirements of the Spanish Directorate General of the Guardia Civil for the Type B weapons license. This also protects the client from potential legal repercussions stemming from an inaccurate declaration. An approach that relies on the client's subjective estimation of value is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for an objective and verifiable valuation, potentially leading to a false declaration to the authorities. Such a failure could result in the denial of the license, or worse, legal penalties for the client and disciplinary action for the professional. Another unacceptable approach is to inflate the appraised value to meet a perceived financial target for the client. This constitutes a deliberate misrepresentation of facts to the licensing authority, violating both ethical principles of honesty and integrity and specific regulations that mandate truthful declarations. This could lead to severe consequences, including license revocation and criminal charges. Finally, an approach that suggests delaying the valuation until a more opportune market moment, without addressing the immediate licensing requirements, is also problematic. While market timing can be a factor in asset sales, it does not absolve the professional of the responsibility to provide accurate information for the licensing application at the required time. This could lead to the client being unable to obtain or maintain their license due to incomplete or outdated documentation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulations. In this case, Spanish firearms licensing laws. They must then assess the client's request against these regulations, prioritizing compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with potential conflicts, such as a discrepancy between the client's expectations and regulatory requirements, the professional should communicate transparently with the client, explain the legal and ethical constraints, and propose solutions that are compliant and beneficial in the long term. This often involves educating the client about the process and the importance of accurate reporting. Question 11. Investigation of a firearms instructor's ethical obligations in Spain. A client expresses a strong desire for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B for personal defense, but demonstrates a significant lack of understanding regarding safe firearm handling, storage, and the legal ramifications of firearm ownership. What is the most responsible course of action for the instructor? Option A. Immediately refuse to train the client, citing their apparent lack of knowledge as an insurmountable barrier without further attempt to educate or assess their potential for learning. Option B. Proceed with the training for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B as requested, assuming the client's stated need for personal defense is sufficient justification and that the official licensing body will conduct its own thorough vetting. Option C. Advise the client to pursue a different type of firearms license that may have less stringent requirements, without fully exploring their suitability for the Type B license. Option D. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's understanding of firearm safety, legal responsibilities, and the specific requirements for a Type B license, providing education where necessary, and only proceeding if the client demonstrates adequate comprehension and responsible intent. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's understanding of firearm safety, legal responsibilities, and the specific requirements for a Type B license, providing education where necessary, and only proceeding if the client demonstrates adequate comprehension and responsible intent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms instructor in Spain due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated need for a Type B license and their apparent lack of understanding regarding the responsibilities and legal requirements associated with firearm ownership. The instructor must navigate the ethical imperative to ensure client safety and compliance with Spanish law, specifically Royal Decree 137/1993, which regulates firearms, while also respecting the client's right to pursue a legal activity. The professional challenge lies in discerning genuine intent and capability from potential misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of the gravity of obtaining a firearm license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, in-person assessment of the applicant's understanding of firearm safety, legal obligations, and the specific reasons for seeking a Type B license. This assessment should go beyond a superficial confirmation of intent and delve into the applicant's knowledge of safe storage, handling, legal use, and the psychological implications of firearm ownership, as mandated by the spirit of the regulations governing firearm licenses in Spain. This aligns with the instructor's duty of care and the regulatory intent to ensure only responsible individuals are granted firearm licenses. The instructor should explain that a Type B license is for personal defense and requires a demonstrated capacity for responsible ownership, which includes understanding the legal framework and potential consequences of misuse. If the applicant demonstrates a lack of understanding or an inappropriate motivation, the instructor should ethically and legally decline to proceed with the training until the applicant can satisfy these requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the training solely based on the applicant's assertion of needing the license for personal defense, without verifying their comprehension of the associated responsibilities and legal framework. This fails to uphold the instructor's duty of care and potentially facilitates the licensing of an individual who may not be a responsible firearm owner, thereby contravening the underlying principles of Spanish firearms legislation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the applicant outright without attempting to educate them on the requirements and responsibilities. While caution is necessary, a complete refusal without an attempt to assess and potentially guide the applicant might be seen as overly restrictive, provided the applicant is willing to engage in learning and demonstrate understanding. However, if the initial interaction reveals a clear inability or unwillingness to grasp the seriousness of firearm ownership, then refusal is justified. A further incorrect approach is to recommend the applicant seek a different type of license without a clear understanding of the applicant's specific needs and motivations, or without first attempting to ascertain if they can meet the requirements for a Type B license through proper education and assessment. This bypasses the necessary due diligence and could lead to the applicant pursuing a license that is not appropriate for their stated purpose or capability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and responsible stance. The decision-making process should involve 1. Active listening and probing questions to understand the applicant's motivations and existing knowledge. 2. A clear explanation of the legal requirements and responsibilities associated with the specific license type. 3. A structured assessment of the applicant's comprehension and suitability, focusing on safety, legality, and responsible ownership. 4. A firm but fair decision based on the assessment, with clear communication of the rationale, prioritizing public safety and legal compliance above all else. Question 12. Assessment of a firearms instructor in Spain conducting a Licencia de Armas Tipo B evaluation, who observes a candidate exhibiting unusual nervousness and making comments that, while not directly threatening, suggest a lack of emotional control and a potentially cavalier attitude towards firearm safety. Instructor is aware that these specific behaviors are not explicitly listed as disqualifying factors in the current regulations for obtaining the license. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor? Option A. Discuss the candidates concerning behavior with other instructors and candidates to gauge their opinions before deciding on a course of action. Option B. Document the observed behaviors in detail, including the candidate's specific comments, and report these observations to the relevant authorities responsible for firearm licensing in Spain for their further assessment. Option C. Directly deny the candidate the license based on the instructor's personal assessment that the candidate is not a responsible individual without further formal reporting. Option D. Issue the license as normal as the candidate's behavior does not meet the explicit disqualifying criteria outlined in the regulations for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The correct answer is B. Document the observed behaviors in detail, including the candidate's specific comments, and report these observations to the relevant authorities responsible for firearm licensing in Spain for their further assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms instructor in Spain who is responsible for assessing candidates for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The challenge lies in balancing the legal requirements for obtaining the license with the ethical obligation to ensure public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The instructor must navigate a situation where a candidate exhibits concerning behavior that, while not explicitly disqualifying under current law, raises red flags regarding their suitability to possess a firearm. This requires careful judgment, adherence to regulations, and an understanding of the underlying principles of firearm safety and responsible ownership. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves documenting the observed concerning behavior thoroughly and reporting it to the relevant authorities as per established protocols for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B in Spain. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principle of due diligence and prioritizes public safety. The instructor's role extends beyond simply administering a test. It includes an ethical responsibility to identify potential risks. By meticulously documenting the observations and reporting them, the instructor ensures that the appropriate bodies, e.g., the Guardia Civil or the relevant regional police force responsible for firearm licensing, can conduct a further assessment and make an informed decision. This aligns with the spirit of the firearm licensing laws in Spain, which aim to ensure that only responsible and mentally stable individuals are granted the privilege of firearm ownership. The instructor is not making the final decision, but is providing crucial information to those who are empowered to do so. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to overlook the concerning behavior because it does not constitute an explicit disqualification under the current legal framework for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B. This is ethically and professionally unacceptable because it disregards the instructor's duty to report potential risks. While the behavior might not be a direct violation, it signals a potential for future issues that could compromise public safety. Failing to report, it abdicates the instructor's responsibility and could have serious consequences if the individual later misuses a firearm. Another incorrect approach is to directly deny the license based solely on the instructor's personal judgment of the candidate's character, without following the prescribed reporting and assessment procedures. This is wrong because it bypasses the established legal and administrative processes for firearm licensing in Spain. The instructor's role is to assess for compliance with specific criteria and report observations, not to act as the ultimate arbiter of who should or should not possess a firearm. Such an action could be considered an overreach of authority and could lead to legal challenges. A further incorrect approach is to discuss the candidate's concerning behavior with other candidates or colleagues without a formal reporting channel. This is unprofessional and unethical as it breaches confidentiality and could unfairly prejudice other individuals' perceptions or the integrity of the licensing process. Information regarding a candidate's suitability for a firearm license is sensitive and should only be communicated through official, documented channels to the appropriate authorities. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adheres strictly to regulatory requirements, and maintains ethical integrity. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal and regulatory framework governing firearm licenses in Spain, including reporting obligations. 2. Maintaining objective observation and meticulous documentation of all relevant behaviors and interactions during the assessment process. 3. Recognizing that the role of an instructor is to assess against defined criteria and report findings, not to make final licensing decisions. 4. Knowing the established protocols for escalating concerns to the appropriate authorities. 5. Upholding confidentiality and professional conduct at all times. Question 13. Strategic planning requires a licensing officer in Spain who personally knows the applicant for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B to address credible reports of increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior from the applicant. What is the most ethically sound and legally compliant course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately deny the Licencia de Armas Tipo B application based on the personal acquaintance and the officer's subjective discomfort with the applicant's recent behavior, without a formal assessment. Option B. Objectively assess the applicant's current psychological fitness and behavioral patterns against the strict requirements of the Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations, initiating further evaluation or recommending denial if concerns are substantiated. Irrespective of the personal acquaintance, Option C. Discreetly advise the applicant to withdraw their application to avoid a formal denial, thereby circumventing the official assessment process due to the personal connection. Option D. Proceed with granting the Licencia de Armas Tipo B as planned, assuming the applicant's past suitability remains valid and overlooking the recent behavioral reports due to the personal relationship. The correct answer is B. Objectively assess the applicant's current psychological fitness and behavioral patterns against the strict requirements of the Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations, initiating further evaluation or recommending denial if concerns are substantiated, irrespective of the personal acquaintance. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of ethical implications, especially when dealing with sensitive matters such as firearm licensing. In Spain, the Licencia de Armas Tipo B is granted for self-defense and requires a thorough assessment of the applicant's suitability, including their psychological state and any history of violence or instability. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the applicant, a known acquaintance of the licensing officer, is exhibiting concerning behavioral changes that could impact their fitness to possess a firearm. The officer must balance their personal relationship with their official duty to uphold public safety and the strict regulations governing firearm licenses in Spain. The best approach involves prioritizing public safety and regulatory compliance above personal relationships. This means the licensing officer must objectively assess the applicant's current psychological state and any reported behavioral changes against the criteria outlined in Spanish law for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B. If there are credible concerns about the applicant's suitability, the officer has a duty to report these concerns through the proper channels, which may involve recommending further psychological evaluation or denying the license application, regardless of their personal acquaintance. This aligns with the ethical obligation of public servants to act impartially and in the best interest of society, as well as the specific legal requirements for firearm licensing in Spain, which mandate that applicants must demonstrate psychological fitness and a lack of propensity for violence. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the behavioral changes due to the personal relationship, assuming the applicant is still fit to possess a firearm. This would violate the officer's duty to conduct a thorough and impartial assessment and could have severe consequences if the applicant were to misuse the firearm. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the license based solely on the personal acquaintance, without a proper objective assessment of the applicant's current suitability according to the legal framework. While impartiality is key, the denial must be based on established criteria, not personal bias or assumptions. Finally, attempting to expedite the process or influence the outcome due to the personal connection would be a clear breach of ethical conduct and Spanish regulations, undermining the integrity of the licensing system. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and legal obligations. This involves a clear understanding of the relevant Spanish laws and regulations pertaining to firearm licensing. The next step is to gather objective information relevant to the applicant's suitability, including any reported behavioral changes. This information should then be evaluated against the established legal criteria. If concerns arise, the professional must follow established procedures for escalating these concerns or making a decision based on the evidence, ensuring that personal relationships do not compromise professional judgment or public safety. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an applicant for a Type B weapons license in Spain who appears visibly distressed and expresses a strong, albeit vaguely articulated, fear for their personal safety is seeking to carry a handgun for protection. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive, documented assessment of the applicant's eligibility, verifying their identity, age, mental and physical fitness, and rigorously evaluating their demonstrated need for a Type B license as per the Reglamento de Armas, while meticulously documenting all steps and findings. Option B. Deny the Type B weapons license application outright due to the applicant's visible distress, assuming their emotional state indicates a potential risk. Option C. Advise the applicant to acquire a firearm for personal defense immediately, while the licensing process is pending, to address their immediate safety concerns. Option D. Immediately grant the Type B weapons license based on the applicant's expressed fear and desire for personal protection, as their emotional state suggests a genuine need. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive, documented assessment of the applicant's eligibility, verifying their identity, age, mental and physical fitness, and rigorously evaluating their demonstrated need for a Type B license as per the Reglamento de Armas, while meticulously documenting all steps and findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated need and the potential for misuse of a regulated item. The applicant's emotional state and vague justification for a Type B weapon license in Spain require careful ethical consideration and adherence to strict legal requirements. The challenge lies in balancing the applicant's rights with the public safety mandate of the licensing authority. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, documented assessment of the applicant's suitability, strictly adhering to the requirements of the Spanish Reglamento de Armas arms regulations. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, age, mental and physical fitness, and ensuring they meet all specific criteria for a Type B license, which is for carrying handguns for personal defense. A key element is to meticulously document all interactions, inquiries, and the basis for any decision, ensuring transparency and accountability. The Reglamento de Armas mandates a rigorous process, including medical and psychological evaluations, and a clear demonstration of a legitimate need for carrying a firearm for personal defense, which goes beyond mere subjective fear. The licensing authority must ensure that the applicant does not pose a risk to themselves or others, as stipulated by Article 146 of the Reglamento de Armas. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to grant the license based solely on the applicant's expressed fear and desire for personal protection, without a comprehensive, documented evaluation of their actual need and suitability, as mandated by Spanish law. This bypasses the critical requirement to demonstrate a concrete and justifiable need for carrying a handgun for personal defense, as outlined in the Reglamento de Armas, and ignores the potential for emotional distress to cloud judgment. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the application outright due to the applicant's emotional state, without conducting the legally required comprehensive assessment. While emotional distress is a factor to consider in fitness, it does not automatically disqualify an applicant if they can otherwise meet all legal and regulatory criteria for a Type B license. This approach fails to uphold the due process rights of the applicant and neglects the detailed evaluation process prescribed by the Reglamento de Armas. A third incorrect approach would be to provide the applicant with a firearm without the proper Type B license, perhaps under the guise of temporary security. This is a severe violation of Spanish firearms law, as it circumvents the entire licensing and registration process, creating significant legal liability and posing an immediate public safety risk. The Reglamento de Armas strictly prohibits the possession and carrying of firearms without the appropriate authorization. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic, evidence-based decision-making process. This involves understanding the specific legal framework, in this case, the Spanish Reglamento de Armas, meticulously gathering and documenting all relevant information, conducting thorough assessments as mandated by law, and making decisions based on objective criteria rather than subjective impressions or emotional responses. When faced with an applicant exhibiting distress, the professional's duty is to proceed with the legally prescribed evaluation process, ensuring all safety and suitability checks are performed rigorously and impartially. Transparency, documentation, and adherence to the letter of the law are paramount to ensure both public safety and fair treatment of applicants. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms dealer in Madrid, Spain, is processing an application for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The applicant, who has previously made disparaging remarks about police officers during casual conversation, presents a valid Type B license. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the dealer? Option A. Verify the validity of the Type B license, and if valid, proceed with the sale while documenting the client's previous statements and any observed demeanor, and be prepared to report concerns to the Guardia Civil if any further red flags arise during the transaction. Option B. Refuse the sale immediately due to the applicant's past disparaging remarks about police officers, without further investigation or documentation. Option C. Proceed with the sale immediately upon confirmation of the valid Type B license, as the license itself signifies the applicant's legal eligibility. Option D. Advise the applicant that their previous comments are concerning and suggest they seek counseling before reapplying. Then proceed with the sale if they agree. The correct answer is A. Verify the validity of the Type B license, and if valid, proceed with the sale while documenting the client's previous statements and any observed demeanor, and be prepared to report concerns to the Guardia Civil if any further red flags arise during the transaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Spain when a client, who has previously expressed concerning sentiments about law enforcement, requests to purchase a Type B firearm. The challenge lies in balancing the legal right of a citizen to acquire a firearm with the dealer's ethical and legal responsibility to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who may pose a risk to public safety. The dealer must exercise sound judgment, adhering strictly to Spanish regulations governing the sale of Type B weapons, which are intended for personal defense and require a specific license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented assessment of the client's eligibility and suitability, going beyond the mere presentation of a Type B license. This approach requires the dealer to verify the validity of the license, and crucially, to assess the client's demeanor and any expressed sentiments that might indicate a potential misuse of the firearm. If the client's statements or behavior raise reasonable concerns about their intent or mental state, the dealer has a professional and ethical obligation to refuse the sale and report their concerns to the relevant authorities, such as the Guardia Civil. This aligns with the spirit of Spanish firearms law, which prioritizes public safety and places a duty of care on licensed dealers. The dealer must document all interactions and the reasons for any refusal. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale solely based on the client presenting a valid Type B license. This fails to acknowledge the dealer's broader responsibility to assess suitability and prevent potential misuse. While the license indicates legal permission, it does not guarantee that the individual is not a risk, especially given their concerning statements. This approach disregards the ethical imperative to act with prudence when public safety is potentially at stake and could lead to a violation of the dealer's duty of care under Spanish law. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's statements as mere venting and proceed with the sale without further inquiry or documentation. This demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and an abdication of responsibility. The dealer should not make assumptions about the client's intentions based on their own interpretation of venting, but should instead take any concerning statements seriously as potential indicators of risk. A third incorrect approach is to refuse the sale outright without any specific, documented reason beyond a general unease, and without reporting the concerns. While refusal might be the correct outcome, the justification must be grounded in specific observations or regulatory concerns. A vague refusal without reporting could be seen as arbitrary and does not fulfill the dealer's obligation to assist authorities in maintaining public safety if there is a genuine concern. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Verifying all legal documentation, the Type B license in this case. 2. Actively listening to and observing the client for any indicators of potential risk, including concerning statements or behavior. 3. Consulting internal policies and relevant Spanish firearms regulations, e.g., Royal Decree 137/1993, which regulates firearms. 4. Documenting all interactions, observations, and decisions meticulously. 5. If reasonable concerns arise, exercising the discretion to refuse the sale and reporting these concerns to the appropriate law enforcement agency, Guardia Civil, with a clear, documented rationale. This process ensures compliance with the law while upholding ethical responsibilities to public safety. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms dealer in Spain, licensed to issue Licencia de Armas Tipo B, is presented with an application from a client who previously held such a license. The client now submits a new medical certificate stating a history of severe anxiety. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the dealer? Option A. Refuse the application outright due to the mention of severe anxiety without consulting the relevant authorities. Option B. Immediately contact the Guardia Civil's Arms and Explosives Intervention Unit to clarify the implications of the medical certificate for the client's eligibility for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B and follow their guidance. Option C. Accept the medical certificate as sufficient proof of the client's current mental state and process the application without further consultation. Option D. Proceed with the application, assuming the client's previous license indicates they remain fit to possess a firearm, despite the new medical information. The correct answer is B. Immediately contact the Guardia Civil's Arms and Explosives Intervention Unit to clarify the implications of the medical certificate for the client's eligibility for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B and follow their guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Spain when a client, who has previously held a Licencia de Armas Tipo B, now presents a medical certificate indicating a history of severe anxiety. The challenge lies in balancing the legal requirements for firearm licensing with the ethical responsibility to prevent potential harm. The dealer must navigate the specific regulations of the Spanish Guardia Civil concerning firearm possession and mental health, while also upholding a duty of care. This requires careful judgment to avoid both facilitating the acquisition of a firearm by an individual who may pose a risk and unfairly denying a license based on incomplete or misinterpreted information. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately verifying the implications of the new medical certificate with the relevant authorities. This approach directly addresses the core of the issue, the potential impact of the client's medical condition on their eligibility for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B, as stipulated by Spanish law. The dealer should proactively contact the Guardia Civil's Arms and Explosives Intervention Unit, Intervención de Armas y Explosivos, to understand their specific procedures and requirements when a medical certificate raises concerns about mental fitness. This ensures compliance with Article 97 of the Royal Decree 137/1993, which outlines the conditions for obtaining and retaining firearm licenses, including the necessity of demonstrating full physical and psychological capacity. By seeking official guidance, the dealer acts responsibly, ethically, and legally, prioritizing public safety and adhering to the strict regulatory framework governing firearm ownership in Spain. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the application without further inquiry, assuming the client's previous license implies continued eligibility, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This ignores the explicit requirement for ongoing assessment of fitness and the potential impact of new medical information, breaches the duty of care by potentially overlooking a risk to public safety. Accepting the medical certificate at face value and proceeding with the application without consulting the Guardia Civil, despite the indication of severe anxiety, is also professionally unacceptable. While the certificate is presented, its implications for a Type B license, which requires a higher standard of psychological fitness than some other categories, are not automatically clear. The dealer has a responsibility to ensure the certificate meets the specific criteria for this license type as interpreted by the issuing authority. Directly refusing the application solely based on the mention of severe anxiety without consulting the Guardia Civil is premature and potentially discriminatory. While caution is warranted, Spanish law and ethical practice require a process of assessment, not an immediate denial based on a single piece of information without official clarification. The dealer should not act as the sole arbiter of the client's fitness without the guidance of the regulatory body. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential conflict between the client's request and public safety concerns. 2. Consulting the relevant legal and regulatory framework, in this case, Spanish firearms law and Guardia Civil directives. 3. Proactively seeking clarification from the authoritative body, Guardia Civil, regarding the interpretation and implications of the presented medical information. 4. Acting only upon clear guidance from the authorities to ensure both legal compliance and ethical responsibility. This systematic approach prevents hasty decisions and ensures that actions are grounded in established procedures and a commitment to safety. Question 17. The risk matrix shows that a firearms dealer in Madrid, who is also a close friend of a senior officer within the Guardia Civil's Arms and Explosives Unit, is applying for Type B weapons license. The dealer is aware of this personal relationship, but has not yet disclosed it to the licensing authority. Which course of action best upholds the ethical and legal requirements for obtaining a Type B weapons license in Spain? Option A. Proceed with the application as normal, assuming the personal relationship will not influence the outcome and will not be discovered. Option B. Immediately inform the Guardia Civil of the personal relationship and provide all relevant documentation, recusing oneself from any involvement in the application process that could be perceived as influenced by the friendship. Option C. Discreetly leverage the personal relationship to ensure the application is processed favorably and efficiently. Option D. Wait to disclose the personal relationship only if specifically asked about potential conflicts of interest by the Guardia Civil during the application review. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the Guardia Civil of the personal relationship and provide all relevant documentation, recusing oneself from any involvement in the application process that could be perceived as influenced by the friendship. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest scenario involving a firearms dealer applying for a Type B weapons license in Spain. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to navigate complex ethical considerations and strict regulatory compliance to maintain the integrity of the licensing process and public safety. The applicant must demonstrate not only technical competence, but also unwavering adherence to ethical standards and Spanish firearms legislation. The best professional approach involves full transparency and proactive disclosure. This means immediately informing the Guardia Civil of the potential conflict of interest, providing all relevant documentation, and recusing oneself from any part of the licensing process that could be influenced by the personal relationship. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of integrity, impartiality, and accountability mandated by Spanish law governing firearms licensing e.g. Ley Orgánica 1/2015, de 30 de marzo, por la que se modifica la Ley Orgánica 10/1995, de 23 de November, del Código Penal, and associated royal decrees and regulations concerning firearms and their possession. The Guardia Civil, as the issuing authority, must be able to assess applications free from any undue influence or perceived bias. Full disclosure ensures that the decision-making process remains objective and legally sound. Upholding public trust in the firearms licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the application without disclosing the relationship, hoping it goes unnoticed. This is ethically reprehensible and a direct violation of the duty to be truthful and transparent with licensing authorities. It undermines the integrity of the licensing process and could lead to severe legal repercussions, including the denial of the license, revocation of any existing licenses, and potential criminal charges for misrepresentation or fraud. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose the relationship if directly questioned by the Guardia Civil. While this is less egregious than complete non-disclosure, it still falls short of the highest ethical standards. It suggests an attempt to manage information rather than embrace full transparency, potentially creating an impression of withholding information until compelled. This can erode trust and may still be viewed as a failure to proactively uphold the spirit of the law, which emphasizes openness and honesty in all dealings with regulatory bodies. Finally, attempting to influence the outcome through the personal connection, even if the relationship is disclosed, is also an unacceptable approach. This directly contravenes the principle of impartiality. The licensing decision must be based solely on the applicant's qualifications, adherence to legal requirements, and suitability as determined by the Guardia Civil, not on personal connections. Such an attempt would be a serious ethical breach and a violation of the law, jeopardizing the applicant's license and reputation. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest early. 2. Understanding the specific legal and ethical obligations under Spanish firearms law. 3. Choosing the path of maximum transparency and disclosure. 4. Seeking guidance from legal counsel or regulatory bodies if unsure about the appropriate course of action. 5. Acting with integrity and ensuring that all decisions are defensible from both a legal and ethical standpoint. Question 18. Process analysis reveals an applicant for a Spanish licensure de Armas Tipo B has submitted all standard documentation, including a clean criminal record. However, their employment history includes a past disciplinary action from a previous employer, which they have disclosed and explained as a minor workplace infraction unrelated to violence or illegal activity. How should an official responsible for issuing the Licencia de Armas Tipo be proceed? Option A. Immediately approve the license, as the applicant's criminal record is clean and the disclosed disciplinary action is not a direct disqualifier under the Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations. Option B. Deny the license based on the past disciplinary action, as it indicates a potential lack of judgment or responsibility that could be relevant to firearm ownership. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documents, including the details of the past disciplinary action, and seek further clarification from the applicant if necessary, to ensure all regulatory requirements for suitability are met. Option D. Approve the license without further investigation, assuming the applicant's explanation for the disciplinary action is sufficient and does not pose a risk. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documents, including the details of the past disciplinary action, and seek further clarification from the applicant if necessary, to ensure all regulatory requirements for suitability are met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the strict requirements of the Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations with the personal circumstances of an applicant. The core tension lies in upholding the integrity of the licensing process, which is designed for public safety, while also considering the nuances of individual situations that might not directly contravene the law but could raise concerns about suitability. The applicant's history, even if not a direct disqualifier, necessitates careful ethical consideration and adherence to the spirit of the law, not just its letter. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented review of all provided information, cross-referencing it against the specific criteria outlined in the Spanish regulations for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B. This approach prioritizes objective assessment based on established legal requirements. It necessitates seeking clarification from the applicant regarding any ambiguities or potentially concerning aspects of their history, such as the previous disciplinary action, to ensure a complete understanding before making a decision. This aligns with the ethical duty to act impartially and to ensure that all licensing decisions are based on verifiable facts and legal mandates, thereby upholding public safety and the credibility of the licensing authority. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately approving the license based solely on the absence of a direct, explicit disqualification in the applicant's criminal record. This fails to acknowledge the broader suitability requirements implicitly embedded within licensing regulations designed for public safety. The previous disciplinary action, even if not a criminal conviction, could indicate a pattern of behavior or judgment that might be relevant to the responsible ownership of a firearm, and ignoring it is a regulatory and ethical oversight. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license outright due to the past disciplinary action, without a comprehensive review of the current application and the specific nature of that past action. This approach is overly punitive and does not adhere to the principle of assessing each applicant based on their current circumstances and compliance with all stipulated requirements. It risks making a decision based on assumptions rather than a thorough, evidence-based evaluation as mandated by the regulations. A third incorrect approach is to approve the license without any further inquiry, assuming the applicant's stated reasons for seeking the license are sufficient. This bypasses the due diligence required by the licensing process. The regulations imply a need for a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, which includes understanding their motivations and ensuring there are no underlying issues that could compromise public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a complete understanding of the relevant legal framework, the Spanish Licencia de Armas Tipo B regulations. This is followed by a meticulous review of all submitted documentation, identifying any areas that require further clarification or investigation. Ethical considerations, such as public safety and fairness, must guide the interpretation and application of the regulations. When faced with ambiguous information or potentially concerning past events, the professional's duty is to gather all necessary facts, consult relevant legal guidance if needed, and make a decision that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, prioritizing the safety and well-being of the public. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a firearms dealer in Spain, holding a Licencia de Armas Tipo B, has a close personal relationship with an individual seeking to purchase a firearm. The dealer is aware that this individual has a history of minor altercations, though no convictions that would automatically disqualify them under current Spanish law. The dealer is considering whether to proceed with the sale, given the potential for increased business. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms dealer in this situation? Option A. Proceed with the sale, relying on personal judgment that the buyer is currently fit to own a firearm, as there are no automatic disqualifying convictions. Option B. Sell the firearm to the individual, but advise them to be particularly cautious in their behavior to avoid future issues, without reporting the relationship to authorities. Option C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and the buyer's history of altercations to the Guardia Civil, and await their guidance before proceeding with any sale. Option D. Discreetly inquire with the buyer about the nature of their past altercations to assess their current suitability without involving official channels. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and the buyer's history of altercations to the Guardia Civil and await their guidance before proceeding with any sale. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates a potential conflict of interest scenario for a firearms dealer in Spain holding a Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The challenge lies in balancing business interests with the stringent ethical and legal obligations associated with the sale and possession of firearms. Specifically, the dealer must ensure that all transactions comply with Spanish law, particularly Royal Decree 137/1993, which regulates firearms. The ethical imperative is to prevent firearms from falling into unauthorized hands, thereby upholding public safety. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict to the relevant authorities and seeking guidance. This aligns with the principles of integrity and accountability mandated by firearms regulations and general ethical business conduct. By proactively informing the Guardia Civil, the authority responsible for firearms licensing and control in Spain about the situation, the dealer demonstrates a commitment to upholding the law and ethical standards. This allows for an official assessment and directive, ensuring that any subsequent actions are compliant and do not compromise public safety or the integrity of the licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the sale without full disclosure, hoping the relationship remains undisclosed. This violates the principle of transparency and could lead to a breach of firearms regulations if the buyer's eligibility is compromised by their relationship with the dealer. Another incorrect approach is to rely on personal judgment about the buyer's suitability without official confirmation. Spanish law requires strict adherence to eligibility criteria, and personal assumptions are insufficient and potentially dangerous. Finally, attempting to circumvent reporting requirements by structuring the transaction in a way that appears to avoid scrutiny is a serious ethical and legal failing, undermining the entire regulatory framework designed to ensure responsible firearms ownership. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct above all else. This involves a proactive stance on identifying and reporting potential conflicts of interest, seeking clarification from regulatory bodies when in doubt, and maintaining meticulous records of all transactions and communications. The guiding principle should always be the safeguarding of public safety and the integrity of the firearms control system. Question 20. What factors determine the suitability of an applicant for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B in Spain, beyond the minimum legal requirements, when the applicant exhibits a concerning lack of respect for firearm safety protocols during a practical assessment? Option A. A strict adherence to only the quantifiable, objective criteria stipulated in Spanish law for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B, such as age verification and criminal record checks, without considering subjective observations of behavior. Option B. An assessment primarily influenced by the instructor's personal assumptions or biases regarding the applicant's background, rather than observable behaviors directly related to firearm safety. Option C. Comprehensive evaluation of the applicant's adherence to all explicit legal requirements for the license, combined with a qualitative assessment of their observed demeanor, attitude towards firearm safety, and understanding of responsible ownership, even if subjective concerns arise that do not constitute explicit legal disqualifications. Option D. A dismissal of any behavioral concerns raised during the assessment, provided the applicant technically meets all explicit legal disqualifications outlined in Spanish firearm regulations. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive evaluation of the applicant's adherence to all explicit legal requirements for the license, combined with a qualitative assessment of their observed demeanor, attitude towards firearm safety, and understanding of responsible ownership, even if subjective concerns arise that do not constitute explicit legal disqualifications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm instructor in Spain when assessing a candidate for a Licencia de Armas Tipo B. The challenge lies in balancing the legal requirements for firearm ownership with the ethical responsibility to ensure public safety, particularly when a candidate exhibits concerning behaviors that might not explicitly violate a specific law, but raise red flags regarding their suitability. The instructor must apply a nuanced judgment that goes beyond a simple checklist of legal criteria. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment that considers not only the candidate's adherence to the explicit requirements of Spanish law for a Tipo B license, such as age, mental and physical capacity, and absence of disqualifying criminal convictions, but also a qualitative evaluation of their attitude towards firearms and their understanding of responsible ownership. This includes observing their demeanor, listening to their responses to questions about firearm safety and handling, and noting any indications of impulsivity, aggression, or a lack of respect for the seriousness of firearm possession. The instructor's duty of care extends to identifying potential risks that could lead to misuse, even if the candidate technically meets the minimum legal thresholds. This proactive and holistic assessment aligns with the spirit of firearm regulation, which aims to prevent harm by ensuring only responsible individuals are granted licenses. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the quantifiable, objective criteria outlined in the Spanish legal framework for the Licencia de Armas Tipo B, such as verifying age and checking for criminal records, while disregarding subjective observations about the candidate's attitude or demeanor. This fails to acknowledge the ethical imperative to prevent potential harm and relies on an incomplete understanding of what constitutes a responsible firearm owner. The law provides a baseline, but professional judgment requires going beyond this baseline when circumstances warrant. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss any concerns about the candidate's behavior simply because they do not constitute an explicit legal disqualification under current Spanish law. This demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and an abdication of the instructor's responsibility to act in the best interest of public safety. The absence of a specific prohibition does not equate to suitability. A further incorrect approach would be to allow personal biases or assumptions about the candidate's background or appearance to influence the assessment, rather than focusing on observable behaviors and their implications for firearm safety. This introduces an element of unfairness and undermines the integrity of the licensing process. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Spanish legislation governing firearm licenses. This framework must then incorporate a qualitative assessment of the candidate's character, attitude, and understanding of responsibility, using observation and careful questioning. When any aspect of this assessment raises concerns, even if not explicitly disqualifying under the law, the professional should err on the side of caution, seeking further information or recommending against the license, thereby fulfilling their ethical obligation to public safety.